Sad about that, folks. Kind of got knocked off at the beginning. But you see the title down below. This is a bit of a response to AVG and James Wolfe's newest nerd episode where he talks about the Tiger Electronic games. Now I think, and I can't really remember much, although my family kind of says I can remember certain other things, but I can't remember other things besides those things, and well, you kind of get the idea. It's like, oh, you remember that, but you can't remember this kind of deal. But honestly, I don't know. I think I did. I think me and my sisters did, but I can't really, off the top of my head, remember yay or nay. But I believe we may have had a few Tiger games, electronic handheld games ourselves when we were kids. Not saying we did, and if we did, it was like towards the later stages of Tiger Electronics, mostly when they started entering the 90s. So basically mid to later stages, if you will. Now, I heard what James had to say there, as the nerd character, and probably a bit of truth from himself as well. The Tiger games were indeed, as he would say, the poverty version, or basically an alternative to what the Game Boy was. I mean, basically, even when the Game Boy Advance came out, when this guy came out around 2000, Tiger handhelds was still around at the time. Even when the Game Boy Color made its debut, Tiger handhelds was still around. So what's the big difference? So what was always the big difference between Tiger games and of course the Game Boy games and even Game Gear games? Well, the biggest difference was, of course, unlike Game Gear and Game Boy, where you had to buy cartridges for the system, Tiger was their own individual games. You didn't have to buy anything. And now, true, like he said, there were some systems out there that came out and they tried to go that cartridge route. They did the Gamecom, they did the R-Zone, but the biggest success, believe it or not, was when they released the non-game cartridge, the non-cartridge game handheld games, I should say. It's a little late right now, but still. Basically, it's the biggest success came when they sold the non-cartridge handheld game versions of some of the more popular games out there. Now, they did inspire other companies like Konami, and such, and Capcom maybe, and a few others to do their own non-cartridge handheld games. They even inspired, believe it or not, companies like McDonald's to use these as part of their Happy Meals or Mighty Kids meals. Now, at places like McDonald's, or I used to work at Burger King, you didn't have to buy the Mighty Kids meal. You didn't have to buy the kids meal, the Happy Meal, whatever you want to call it. You could actually just buy these individually. I think they cost maybe $1 or $1.20 or something. Probably about the same now. And you could buy them just to collect them. And basically what these were, from companies like McDonald's, were basically games that were inspired, were little non-cartridge handhelds, if you will, mini handhelds, that were inspired by Tiger Electronics. Yeah, Tiger Electronics had that big of an impact, believe it or not, due to the fact that you had companies like McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, Jack in the Box, if you will, Carl's Jr., you name it, fast food restaurants, along with other established game companies like Konami, Capcom, Acclaim, whatever you want to call it, releasing their own non-cartridge ones. And it's because of the success they saw Tiger was having. And that's the influence Tiger Electronics had. Even to the point, like I said, that in 2004, these guys were released as part of the Happy Meal, Mighty Kids meal deal back with McDonald's. In 2004, this was basically released at the time that the Sonic Heroes game was released on GameCube, Xbox, and PS2. Now, both games, they do work, except this one's battery is very, very low. And it's basically, from what I can understand, from what I remember, this is a volleyball game between Amy and Rouge, this one. And the way these games worked were a little bit different. Now I give credit to McDonald's and other companies that may have gone in this direction with their non-cartridge handhelds. And that was, they didn't rely on switching batteries, because the battery in here is kind of like a watch battery. And all you'd have to do is just flick it on, like you're flicking on a switch. There you go. It's just a switch that you're going to flick on and off. All you have to do is replace the battery. Easier said than done. Now this one still sort of works. The battery still sort of works on it. And this is basically Sonic doing his city escape surfing. And again, all you have to do, unlike the Tiger games, switch it on. And I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's the screen. And then all you have to do is just go back and forth on it, just like that. See? I don't know if you can hear that. And basically that's what it is. Now true, their buttons were a lot more limited than what you had with the Tiger games, no doubt about it. The only closest I think you'll get is something like this, and that's it. Well, the Tiger games, they were kind of like that too, but sometimes they would have more buttons. But again, trying to at least speak from experience, because I really, I can't remember whether or not me and my sisters or my cousins or anything had Tiger games at that time. But speaking from experience, not just from these, but from playing the Tiger games myself, again, even though I can't remember if I had one or so, if my sisters had one or what, it is true what James said. They were kind of the alternative to what the Game Boy and the Game Gear was. But here's the one thing that, even in character or not, I think James, forgot to, well, he mentioned, but not really. He mentioned at the beginning of the video that it was either, that for a lot of us, because of how expensive Game Boy and Game Gear was, it was either the Tiger game or nothing. And that is true. Tiger games cost just as much, if not cheaper, than a Game Gear game or a Game Gear game cartridge, or basically they cost a lot cheaper or about the same as a game cartridge for Game Gear or for Game Boy. So basically, what you'd be paying for like one of these, whether it's Game Boy Colored or Game Boy, what you'd be paying for one of these, you'd be paying just as much, if not a lot lesser, for the Tiger handheld game. For a Tiger handheld game. I mean, let's say you wanted to play, as he pointed out, one of the Mega Man games, Mega Man 1 or 2, or even 3. And let's say you wanted to play the Game Boy version. But you couldn't do that because the game cost too much. But then all of a sudden you saw in the toy aisle, and mostly that's what these were, the toy aisle, you saw the Mega Man electronic handheld. Your parents would be like, well, look, you get the whole handheld for just as much, if not less, than what you'd be paying for that. And basically that gave you and them a choice. It's like, look, we could pay for the cartridge game, but you'll probably lose, but look, you get look, it's the same game, if you will, in some ways. They'd be like, it's basically this is what parents did, because sometimes we would rely on them to buy these things. They'd be like, look, it's the same game and it's a little cheaper or about the same price than for that cartridge game that you want. And basically they'd be pointing out that with this, you could take it on the road, and when they would look at the instructions on the back of the packaging, they'd be like, and look, it only takes 2 AA's, a lot cheaper. Basically they'd be saying that, that, look, cheaper, it's a little cheaper, if not the same, and oh, look at this, it doesn't waste as many batteries as the Game Boy or the Game Gear would. So obviously obviously back and forth, the favorite would end up, the winner would turn out being the Tiger Electronic handheld, as crazy as that sounds. Because even if, let's say, you had a Game Boy, and let's say you wanted to play the latest game on Game Boy, but it was expensive, and then all of a sudden you saw Tiger had a handheld version of that game, what direction do you think your parents would go with? I mean, let's say, for example, Street Fighter 2. You know, they know how popular Street Fighter is, right? Well, back then, Game Boy games would cost as much as maybe what DS games do now, $30, right? I mean, not 30, but $40 sometimes. About $30 to $40. A parent would see a handheld, Tiger Electronic handheld game, see that it costs between $20 and $30, and they would say, you know what, we're going to go with that version. It's either that or you don't get the game at all. That's basically how it was. So again, that's where you know, you can kind of understand where James came from when he said it was either this or nothing. Because either we agreed to, you know, have that version of the game, the handheld game, or not have it at all. Now the one thing about it though, and here's the thing that I think James failed to mention. Yes, it was the poverty, more cheap-ass version of the game. And yes, it allowed you to take that very game on the road as if you were taking it on the road if you had the Game Boy cartridge. And true, the graphics, or whatever you call them, were very primitive. But here's the thing. Primitive or not, they were, if primitive or not, they were, in a sense, the same game. True, it didn't have the graphic background moving with the character, and basically the characters were like, you know, just standing in place, or the only moving background you would have is like little side things, little digital side things running with you or moving with you, and that's it. The point is, and again, this is one thing out of respect to James that he did not mention. What he didn't mention was it is the same game. It's just not as it's not graphically superior. It's not as graphically superior as what you would see on a Game Gear or a Game Boy. That's basically the big difference. The graphics, or whatever you want to call them, the LCD graphics or the LCD picture, if you will, whatever you want to call it. I guess you could say the what would you call it? Okay, how about this? The LCD flip graphics, like flip page. You know, like, you know, when you would draw on a little flip book and you draw one. Let's say you draw a stick figure on one page. You draw a stick figure on a page, and then you draw that same stick figure with it, but it's, you know, you have an arm or a leg moved. You know, it's like if you're drawing a picture and you have the character like this, and then the next page you're having that flip page, the character's like this, and the next page is like this, and like this. You know, page after page, it just keeps moving. That's basically known. That's basically what I look at with the Tiger Electronic games. I look at them as LCD flip page graphics, FPGs, if you will. Yeah, FPG, flip page graphics, because that's what they were. They were like flipping a page. They were like just flipping the pages of a drawing, watching it come to life. That's what they were, and I think James kind of said that. But that's basically what they were. They were FPGs. In a sense. So graphically, they weren't superior to what you would see on Game Boy or Game Gear. But still, even if they weren't graphically on the same level, they were still, in a sense, the same game. Yes, you had the same kind of background, if you will, behind it, with the only exception at times is you would have digital FPGs, flip page graphic backgrounds, FPG movement, backgrounds at times, like with like the game Dinosaurs and all that, like Dinosaurs and the Batman Returns and like the Dinosaurs game and the Batman Returns game, you name it. You would have those kind of graphics. Graphics going along with the primary character graphics that you'd be playing as. I know, sounds a little confusing. But still, superior, but still, bottom of the pit, graphically bottom of the pit, if you will. I mean, even if the graphics, like I said, were not on par with what you saw on Game Boy and Game Gear, in a sense, it was still alternatively and cheaply, it was still the same game. I mean, one thing I do remember at times when people would play, because just like you said, when you would be at school, people would be playing the electronic game, the portable game, and it seems the most accessible game to have at school during lunch break or recess was a Tiger Electronic game, and here's why. Because yes, they were cheaper than a Game Boy. Yes, they were cheaper than a Game Boy game at times, or even a Game Gear game, and they were replaceable. How replaceable? Let's say you accidentally lost your handheld game. Just go back to the store where your parents got you the last one, and see if another copy's there, and just get it. And you wouldn't be wasting that much money. But anyway, that's basically how it was looked at. It was looked at as being the again, but that's how it was looked at. It was looked at as being not just a cheap alternative for the Game Gear, a cheap alternative answer to the Game Gear and the Game Boy, but it was also easier and more cheaper to replace than losing the game, the Game Boy or your Game Boy, your game. Basically, it was easier and cheaper to replace than if you were to lose your Game Boy or your Game Gear or even your game cartridge for any of those systems, if you will. That's basically how it was looked at. Yeah, a cheap alternative, but it was better than nothing, right? But again, it's better than nothing, right? Cheaper to replace than replacing an actual game or the portable game console. I mean, yes, it was always great to be able to take a game like this, put it into your Game Boy or your Game Gear, and hey, have a way, if you will. Was what you were doing. Have a way with playing what you were playing. But still, Tiger's success came from the fact that I think the people at Tiger even knew that their systems, their handhelds, were cheaper to replace, if they got lost, than a Game Boy system or a Game Gear system. They knew that, and that's how they made their money. They knew that, and that's how they made their money. And again, getting back to my point though, graphically unsuperior, graphically not on par. I mean, I admit, graphically it's not on par. It's basically FPG graphics, flip page book graphics, if you will, FPBGs, or flip page book graphics, if you will. Proving that they're not, basically showing that they really aren't on par with the graphics that you would see with the Game Boy or the Game Gear. But alternatively and cheaply, like I was saying, they are in a sense the same game. So like I was trying to say before I got cut up there, so like I was saying, because even I saw it, just like James mentioned, even I saw this. Even I saw this at schools that I went to. Friends would be switching, and people would be playing their Tiger games, and they would be playing, like, let's say, a Mega Man game or a Street Fighter game or various Disney games. I mean, Disney, my goodness. How many Little Mermaid games did they bring out? They brought 2 Little Mermaid games out. One based on the movie, one based on the show. But of course, just like, with them adapting other games that adapted other media licenses from television and movies, they did the same thing. So Sega and Nintendo had Beauty and the Beast for the 16-bit systems. Tiger had it for the handhelds. Same with Lion King. Same with Pocahontas. Power Rangers, same thing. They had 2 Mighty Morphin Rangers. They switched it out. They had several Mighty Morphin Ranger games for the 16-bit systems. Tiger had it for the handhelds. I mean, basically that's how it was. Basically that's how it was. And, there was no denying that. I mean, Tiger, I admit, if you look it up on Amazon and stuff, Tiger themselves even try to be more hip with the crowd. And how did they try to be more hip? At times when they would bring out a handheld game based on a movie license or something, they would try to make the handheld, basically the handheld here, match, look very stylish. They would try to make it look very attractive to the consumer, that even at a decent price, a cheap price, they would want to buy it. I mean, Batman and Robin, when they did that game for the handheld, they included a Batman figure, a miniature Batman figure, if you will, that you got inside the package when you bought the handheld. And the one other thing that they would do with things like Batman and even Star Wars is not only the Batman and Robin one was shaped just like the bat signal was shaped in the Batman logo. The Star Wars Tiger game was shaped like the Millennium Falcon. And what they would do sometimes with those kind of games is, even though they were just like the regular handheld electronic games, they would add in additional buttons to kind of give you more bang for your buck. They would sometimes add in more buttons, a few more buttons, and even a few joysticks, as they would put it, or a little joystick here and there, just to make it not just more attractive, but in their opinion, give you more bang for your buck and at a cheap price. That's why that's one of the things that they would do. But again, point is, Batman and Robin also had a game on the various consoles at that time. So did Star Wars. Star Wars had a bunch of damn games out at that time. But the thing was, the Batman and Robin game, or even let's say Sonic 3D Blast, which was adapted to Tiger Electronics, Street Fighter 2 as well. Even though they were unsuperior in graphics, and yes, cheap alternatives to the originals. They were in a sense, they were somewhat still the same game. So even if you were at school, and I'm trying to get to this, at school playing the handheld, and your friend comes up to you and says, "Oh, well, you're playing that. I'm halfway done with this game." You could say, "Yeah, I know, and oh, by the way, I've almost beat the game right here." You could basically tell them, "Yeah, I'm sort of playing the same game, and oh, I'm almost done." with the game. I almost beat the game, and then basically you can, I guess you could say for a time you could have bragging rights, because you would essentially say, because you can essentially come out and say, yeah, I beat Sonic 3D Blast, or I beat Street Fighter 2, but you would have to come out and admit, yeah, I beat it, but I beat it on the Tiger. I beat the Tiger handheld edition, the handheld version. But still, even if you had to admit that, you might get a few applause here and there, because that's impressive in itself. But again, I totally understand where James is coming from with all the whole Tiger Electronics and their handhelds being the more cheaper versions. But when you think about it, they are alternate versions of the same games, and they are just, I mean, yes, they are alternate cheaper versions of the same game, but reminder, it is in a sense the same game. Graphically, it's not superior, it's not on the same level, but it's still the same game in a sense. So I think that's the one thing we need to remember. Yes, they were, as James put it, poverty, cheap-ass versions of what we had played before, but they were in a sense the same game. I will say this though, don't ever put a wrestling game on portable anymore. I don't think we've seen that much anymore. Don't ever put a wrestling game ever on a portable system. And more importantly, if there's one Tiger game I think you want to avoid, it's WWF Superstars Tiger Electronic game from the early 90s. Avoid that at all costs. Because if the portable games are not easy to play on, let's say, a Game Boy, then that's not worth it either. End of story, end of discussion. But what I'm trying to get across though is, with a few exceptions, the games are still technically, in a sense, the same game. Graphically, they may not be on, graphically they're not on par with what you have on Game Gear or Game Boy, or even the SNES or NES or the Mega Drive or the Genesis or whatever. But they are, in a sense, the same game. So that's basically what I'm gonna say in my response to AVGN's newest video, Tiger Electronic Handhelds. You guys got any responses, comments? Let me know down below, and I will talk to y'all later. God bless. Take care.